creeping. Oh, yeah. Squatchdtv, they're on the case. Steve and Chris, no mystery they can't face. Busting hoaxes, exposing lies. They're the champs of the Bigfoot mystery. Mystery, mystery. Bringing truth, science, and clarity. Clarity. Squatchdtv, they're the real deal. Uncovering the truth, it's time to reveal. Squatchdtv, take us on your quest. Find the legend, put the rumors to rest. Late at night, shadows creeping. Deep in the woods, secrets lay sleeping. Oh yeah. Squatchdtv, they're on the case. Steve and Chris, no mystery they can't face. Busting hoaxes, exposing lies. They're the champs of the Bigfoot mystery. Bringing truth, science, and clarity. Squatchdtv, they're the real deal. Uncovering the truth, it's time to reveal.
Welcome to Squatch-D where the truth is first before all else. Join your hosts, veteran investigator, TV personality, and author Steve Kulls, and from the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Project and the Kentucky Fried Fixes channel, Chris Bennett. Sit back and prepare to take yourself on a journey with the longest-running Bigfoot podcast, Squatch-D. Here are your hosts, Steve and Chris.
And good evening, cyberspace. Welcome to Squatch-D for today's date, September 1st, 2024. I'm your host, your guide, the Squatch Detective, Steve Kulls, along with my co-host right down there, Mr. Chris Bennett.
Hey, Steve, it's good to see you, man. I hope you guys have been doing okay in New York. We've been hot weather here in Kentucky. Like the last few days has been 98 degrees. We've been cooled off a little bit with some rain today, but
well, I always get a little bit worried when we have that click into September because you know what that means is coming.
Yeah.
Fall.
Yeah, that's
another month closer to the. Yeah, you don't have to deal with it, but I'm another month closer to snow on the ground.
Well, yeah, we could have some snow. It usually won't last long if we do, but I'll be glad this type of weather, after it cools off, then I can stop using the air conditioning for maybe a month. I would hate to have to go back from turning the air conditioner off to directly turning the heat on because, you know, I'm a big complainer about power bills and stuff.
Yeah, well, I got about another month before we have to click the heat on.
Okay, yeah.
When the temperature starts dripping down into the low 40s and high 30s.
So how's the neck doing today? Does it feel okay today? No complaints or not too bad?
Not bad at all.
Good.
Not bad. If I ignore it, it's fine.
Good.
So, and of course, we're joined by our great guest tonight, Dr. John Baranchok. Good to see you, sir. Welcome.
Hey, thank
Welcome
you.
aboard,
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's honored for us to have you on tonight. And as usual, what we do is before we kick off the festivities tonight, we do our chat roll call.
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
And let's see who is in. And in today first is Ammon Chris. Good to see you, Ammon.
Hey, Chris.
Relic commented, popped in, said hello. He'll be listening tomorrow and said, have a great show. I like listening to Dr. B.
Thank you, Relic commented. Catch you on the replay, bud.
He's from over in over the pond there in the UK. So we'll see you tomorrow. And we got Walter Kroll in the house. Pat, my good buddy, Pat Collins from Washington County, New York. Tennessee, Kentucky, Bigfoot. Good to see you. Boris Kahn, Goonie Goo Goo. Sandra Piper in the house. Tennessee, Cherokee. The Buckwist crew. Good to see you. I wonder if that's probably Jerry in the house.
Welcome.
And we got Ristel Bristol, good to see you. Lil Kilroy's still here.
Little
And he got his icon bag up there too. Look at that. Marty McTie. Martin, good to see you, sir.
Martin, welcome.
Arthur Watch, good to see you as well.
Arthur,
DM Zabo made it for roll call, y'all.
Zabo, welcome.
Going now. Now we start scrolling. Keep them doggies scrolling. Just okay. Here we are. We got David Parker in the house. David, welcome.
David?
Patrick Barron, good to see you. Grasshopper,
Right.
hello. We didn't forget you this week.
Grasshopper.
Just Steve, good to see you, sir. Traveling with Jim, my good
Jim.
buddy Jim. We'll be seeing him in a little bit. And right now, I think that's what we got in chat. So
Could I
see everybody?
Could I give
else?
a shout? Could I give
Sure.
a shout out? I want to give a shout out to Grasshopper, Bristol, and Tennessee, Kentucky Bigfoot. They attended my show when I had one, and it's nice to see them in here.
Very cool.
Very cool. And yep. So, Dr. John, tell us about yourself and how you got involved in Bigfoot research. And of course, you did a show for a while over on Doug's network as well.
Yes, sir. So, goodness gracious, I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a little bit, and would go trout fishing in this little town called Jemez Springs. And I'd walk in through the canyons and into the stream for a half day and then fish back out. And when I was on a variety of streams, I'd find a perfect hole and you could see the good fish in it. And I'd make one cast, and no sooner I was reeling in that cast, a big rock would come plopping into the fishing hole and spook all the fish. And so I'd move down to the next pool, and the same thing happened. And I never saw what was throwing the rock, but I started yelling at it, calling it a jerk and a hole, but there was never any cars at the trailhead. I never saw any other human beings. And at that point, I really wasn't into Bigfoot. So fast forward, oh goodness, I don't know how many years. I was living here in Georgia and decided that I wanted to go fishing. And I wanted to go fishing outside of Blue Ridge there. And I started looking for maps, and I came across the BFRO map, thinking it was a fishing map. But when I clicked on the number on that page, it was a number of expeditions that they were putting on in that state. And so that's how I met Lori Copeland Wade, who, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be seeing her next weekend at something called the Squatch Out, put on by C. Wayne Tothero, who is a personal friend of mine as well. And so I did most of my Bigfoot expeditions either with Lori in Tennessee and Georgia BFRO, or Charlie Raymond at Kentucky BFRO, or his Kentucky, what is it called? Kentucky Research Organization. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I really cut my teeth on Bigfoot expeditions and what was going on. And on one hand, I was really impressed with both Lori and Charlie because they were systematic in their approach, but there was still a lot of science that could have been done. And that's kind of what inspired the book, the Grasping Sasquatch book, and then my original book, Psychological Horizons and Scientific Bigfoot Research. That book, Psychological Horizons and Grasping Sasquatch, are basically the same book, but Doug Hychek threw in some high-tech stuff, like I think they're called QR codes, and you can click on certain words and get definitions, and kind of juiced it up with the tech. And so that's the main difference between Psychological Horizons and Grasping Sasquatch, is the tech that Doug was nice enough to add.
Very cool. So let's get right down to it. You know, what was your thought as a psychologist? You must have been first getting into this going, well, I'd like to see, if these people are, either on some fantasy level or are they actually real, really dealing with something, or they feel they're really dealing with something. And what was your impression that when you got in there as a psychologist, like,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Well, honestly, Lori for sure. I'm not sure about Charlie, but she pre-scouts months ahead. And then I think a week before the expedition, her team gets out and sets up bridges so you don't get wet when you cross a stream. And so I wondered about that. Are they going in there scoping out spots where they can spook you or scare you or fake? And I've never got that sense from either Lori or Charlie. They seem really genuine to me. But again, the big motivator was that a lot of people seem to think that if they're doing the observational science, the empirical observation scientific model, that they're doing the science that's needed. And what I saw and realized pretty early on is that wasn't going to get it, because in the Patterson film, when you think about all that we had in there, we had a film of Bigfoot, we had footprints of Bigfoot, we had casts of Bigfoot, we had, both these guys seeing it. So, personal encounters, and all that was thoroughly rejected by the scientific community, as you guys know. And I think part of the reason is it's not that observational science isn't a true science, but when you're developing a scientific field of research, you start with observational science, and that kind of forms your foundation for where you conduct the experimental science. But we haven't moved off the observational scientific model, and so we're continuing to create all this observational data that's already been rejected by science as not sufficiently scientific. And so part of what my mission is to try and get people to realize that the observational science isn't going to be enough scientific proof that the scientific talking heads would accept, and that we really got to move on to an experimental model that results in numbers that are statistically analyzed, because numbers are science's language. And we haven't really been speaking science's language all these years since the Patterson Gimlin film. And so it's kind of my mission to help researchers understand that we're doing something that isn't going to produce the evidence we need. And I have hopes or delusions of teaching people some of those things. I think the big hurdle is going to be the experimental design and the statistical analysis, because not too many people have experience or education doing that. But you don't have to have a PhD to learn how to do that stuff if if you're willing to dive into it and make the effort and learn it. And if we start using experimental science, our hit rates will go up dramatically. Our ability to have encounters with Bigfoot will go up, because we're doing scientific experimental investigations and learning things from that, and then hopefully replicating that. And we can learn a lot about where they're located, when they're located there, and a variety of other things.
That's very fascinating stuff. And I don't know if you're aware of the work of, we just talked about this not too long ago, about the work of Dr. Henner Fahrenbach.
Yes.
And like he was the first one really to do like this really cool statistical study, and it resulted in bell curves, which indicated to him that there was a living, breathing population out there, and not just So I think that was a great step in the right direction in, charting and replication and the ilk of that. And, it's kind of funny that, and Chris knows this, I've been kind of using that kind of experimentation in my areas for quite a while, but it's just so hit or miss at times that we had something, the pandemic hit, and the whole area was just overflowing with people as it wasn't in years past. And only now, I believe, we're starting to see some comeback to the area. So hopefully we can spin that up again. But so for those who may not know in our audience, describe what maybe the difference in the model that we're using versus the model we should be using. Maybe.
Okay, so the scientific empirical observation model is what we've been doing since
forever.
The Patterson-Gimlin film, and that's going out into the woods and trying to provoke Bigfoot to make a wood knock, for example, or get some photos or videos of Bigfoot and try and use them to prove their existence. The problem I see with that is that the scientific community, through the Patterson-Gimlin film, have already stated that that's not sufficiently scientific to scientifically prove the existence of Bigfoot. But that is, as I said earlier, when you're developing a field of science, you first got to do the observational science. But we've been doing observational science, I've never really done the math, 60 to 65 years at this point, and it just hasn't gotten us anywhere. And if we were to put that evidence up and ask for science to review it, I feel real confident that the result would be the same as it was with the Patterson-Gimlin film. That's not what they're looking for. And so what I'm trying to promote, and what my book is about, is trying to help people understand, number one, that observational model really for us at this point is out of date, because we should have been doing empirical, experimental scientific research for 20 or 30 years. The observational model allowed us to pick up on behaviors and locations and other phenomena that Bigfoot produces. That kind of shines the light for the experimental scientists to go in and then do experiments on that phenomena. So, for example, in an empirical experimental scientific research, you take the observations, you develop what's called a hypothesis. Our community has jumped from the observation to calling them theories without really even ever testing out the hypotheses. And so you develop your hypothesis, let's say wood knocks. One of the big criticisms of wood knocks is, how do you know that a human isn't making that? You can't see the Bigfoot making that wood knock. You can't see a human making that wood knock. But we got to do something to be able to rule out the human influence. And so an example of an experiment, relatively easy, but would take persistence, was going up into a remote area where the likelihood of humans being there to make a wood knock are either nil or very, very low. And you make a wood knock and mark whether you get a response back from that wood knock or not. You do that in one location, and at the same time, you've got another team doing wood knocks in an area where you wouldn't expect Bigfoot to be, but you'd expect humans to be. So you got one area that's tapping into the Bigfoot phenomena, and you've got another area that's tapping into the human phenomena. And you keep tracks of hits and misses and reduce your data down to ones or twos You know, you don't get a Bigfoot knock, or you do get a Bigfoot knock. And once you've got those numbers, you analyze them, and in our case, since we don't have normative data, what's normal for Bigfoot, we'd use something called a Z-test, where we use our own means and standard deviations for doing a Z-test, which would compare the human knock area to the Bigfoot knock area. And so it then, by comparing those, you would suspect, if it's primarily or only the Bigfoots doing the wood knocks, you would expect to get significantly more wood knocks from your Bigfoot area than you would for your human area. And the statistical results is what gives us our objectivity, because boy, the I don't I don't know if I can use obscene words or not on your show or not, but I'll try and keep it.
Shit, just go for it.
You know, the battles that go on over the internet about whether that's a picture of Bigfoot or whether that's fake, all it does, it comes down to opinions. And usually those opinions are biased because the people really believe in their position. Right. Whereas the statistical analysis part of the experimental model takes that opinionated bias out, because the numbers give you your answer, not an opinion, if that makes any sense.
We have a lot of that online. People will deny that you saw a Bigfoot because they simply say, well, Bigfoot doesn't exist, so it's impossible for you to see one.
Well, let me tell you something, Chris Bennett. Living on the Baja, we always see something like that.
Right. But that does a lot of dismissals. You know, of course, you know, it bothers people that maybe had one sighting or one encounter, and that really bothers them. And hey, I laugh at those people that say, "Oh, well, it doesn't exist." Well, you don't know as much as you think you do.
I want to address a comment from Mick, who said the problem is that the Patterson and Gimlin film has never truly been scrutinized in a purely scientific method. The closest we be, that is not true. If we look here, this was the NASI report, and this is a condensed version of that. And this study was done in the early to mid 90s. And this is, like I said, this is a very condensed version of it, and it's 13 pages in its condensed version, but it actually is one of a very close study, as close as scientifically as you can get to it. So if you haven't seen the NASI study, Mick, I implore you to check that out.
Well, yeah, Bill Bunce actually did a really great bit of work on the Patterson Gimlin film, and his site, I think it's still up. The Munns Report is a lot of great information, and a lot of it's scientific, very scientific based. Even figuring out the camera angles, the lens sizes. It's if the lens they used was this, then Patty was 7'5". If the lens they used was this, Patty was 6'9" or whatever. It's just good stuff. Good stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And you mentioned Fehrenbach's study. To me, that's really fascinating, because although it shows Bigfoot has a significantly larger, the average Bigfoot has a significantly larger foot size than the average human foot size. But you mentioned, Steve, that both human foot sizes and Bigfoot sizes both exist on what's called the normal curve. And so, you know, 0 is average, and then one significant step up or one significant step down. In between there is normal. But once you reach one significant step up, then it's either it's either mildly shorter than ours or mildly larger than ours. And so it's amazing that both, to me at least, that both Bigfoots and humans have foot sizes that are normally distributed from the average all the way out to 1 to 2 to 3 standard deviations greater or, smaller. That's real fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's also very consistent with, I guess, other primate foot sizes as well. So I really, I mean, stuff like that, as a non-scientist investigator, I've always said this, and my audience has heard this a million times, is that my job as an investigator is not to prove whether or not something exists, but to gather that evidence and that data and give it to a scientist, and they can do what they need to do with that evidence. So when I'm in that investigation mode and I see these connections, bells and whistles start going off.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Well, that's the thing about the tracks too, that I think it's pretty noticeable. We can say if the width of these tracks, even if we didn't know to look for the mid tarsal break, the pressure ridge area in the track, we can look at the width of the track and say, look, this thing is 5 to 9 inches wide. How many humans have a foot that wide? And I don't know any. I've never seen any. I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, there may be somebody, but I've never seen any.
I've had 2 butt puckering Class B encounters, and one of them involved a likely bluff charge, and then we saw infantile or infant and juvenile Sasquatch peepers. 15 or 16 of us watched them peeping out from behind both sides of the tree for 20 minutes. And the next day we were all too exhausted to go back where we had the bluff charge, but we stuck 2 sticks in the ground vertically to make an X. And one of the young bucks went up the next day and found a footprint and ran back down to camp, got somebody who knew to do some casting. They were casting. As they were waiting for the cast to cure, they looked around and they find a partial footprint down on the drop-off side of the fire road, which we never looked up because we thought it was a landslide coming down the mountain from the high side. We never looked on the drop-off side. And when they looked on the drop-off side, they said they saw 30 to 40 juvenile and infant Bigfoot prints down there. And that's the night when we got back to our Midway base camp. That's the night that we watched those peepers for 20 minutes. And I think why we got bluff charged, or likely bluff charged, was because we just happened to stop right next to the playground or the nursery, not knowing that was going on. So I think I've lost my point at that.
No.
The point was that when he brought that foot cast back, he got every toe, but he got on the great toe, he got the toe impression, but then the joint below that didn't come out. But on all the other toes, every one of the joints in the toe, the mid-tarsal break, the dermal ridges, all that was on there. And that was 17.5 inches long and 8 inches wide is what triggered that story for me.
That's actually a big critter. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. John, let me ask you here to theorize with me a little bit here. In your opinion, do you think that these creatures are emotional beings? Do they feel emotion like humans do? We know they care for their young. Of course, a chimpanzee does too, but they care for their young, and their young seem to stick around with them for a period of time.
Yeah. so that revolves around two terms. One term is sentience, and then the other term is self-aware. Sentience, basically any animal that has a central nervous system with a spinal cord and can feel pain, they're gonna feel emotions as well. So yes, I do think there are emotions there, but no one's really ever looked at whether they're self-aware. The study that showed chimpanzees to be self-aware was they were given a mirror and they could recognize themselves in that mirror. I just saw a video on Facebook the other day where a bear comes across a mirror that somebody set up in the woods and sees himself in the mirror and just proceeds to go apeshit over his reflection and tear that mirror. That's an animal that doesn't have self-awareness.
Right.
But is sentient nonetheless, still has a central nervous system, feels pain, feels different emotions. But that just because an animal is sentient, that doesn't mean they're necessarily self-aware. And I think that's another relatively simple study that needs to be done on Bigfoot to tease that out.
I think I've seen some of those studies you're talking about with the mirror, and I thought those were very fascinating. They did another experiment where they put a paint mark on one of the animals, and I can't remember, this may have been an elephant I was watching, but they put a paint mark on the animal, and then they showed the animal its reflection in the mirror, and after looking at the mirror a little while, it rubbed up on his head to touch that paint mark or chalk mark, whatever it was, and that was really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if we discussed it before we got on the show or in the earlier on in the show, but referring to zapping and whether that's infrasound doing that or not. Again, that's one of the in my book, I have a laboratory study set up for that, either using Bigfoot auditory recordings that have been shown to include infrasound, since we really can't hear it per se, and kind of having a placebo or people thinking they're being exposed to infrasound, but you delete the infrasound track out of it and compare their cortisol levels and different things that are measures of stress responses. And in that experiment, it would allow us to figure out whether we're psyching ourselves up, whether it's our own fear going on. If we don't, and that would be a condition where you're not presented the infrasound to see if you still experience zapping phenomena, so to speak. And then in another condition, you'd have those same folks exposed to a Bigfoot audio call, or if you've ever listened to the elephants, I forget the name of the website. An elephant trumpet sounds very similar to a Bigfoot call, and they produce infrasound that they sense through the pads of their feet. Elephant tribes can communicate 10 miles apart with each other through using infrasound, and it travels through the ground, can travel through the ground 10 miles, and elephants pick that up on the soles of their feet, the infrasound. And the infrasound gets so bad for elephant tenders, they've got to rotate them in and out. After a couple months, because of the constant exposure to infrasound, they start getting nauseous, they start getting headaches, they really get ill. And so they've got to rotate these people in and out simply because of the effects of infrasound on them. So that is pretty fascinating to me as well.
Kind of like the American embassy in Cuba there, where everybody was getting
sound blasting, the brown note. Yeah.
Well, I had that experience where I had a flutter in my ear, and I wouldn't have thought another thing about it. I would have thought maybe it was a bug, and then I would have never thought another thing about it. But when that happened to me, I was looking at my friend's son, Tommy, and at the same time my ear got hit with that, he reached up and swiped his ear, which was on the same side. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, the creatures, they're doing something. I don't know what they're doing, but they're doing something.
And that's part of the challenge of doing that study in a natural condition. And that's why it ends up being a laboratory study, because we don't know for sure when they're putting out infrasound and when they're not. We know that, and we know that elephants do it. I feel pretty certain that Bigfoots do it, but we can't just cut out the infrasound to see if we're psyching ourselves out and stimulating that fight flight response, or whether it's the infrasound stimulating those fight flight kind of symptoms. Right. So,
well, Doc, what would you suggest? I mean, to new researchers who haven't had an encounter yet, but are in a really good area and are expecting to have one or hope to have one, what would you suggest they do to prepare for that sighting, the primary sighting?
Yeah. One of the things, I got into Bigfooting. I didn't care. I had the scientific background. You don't get through a PhD in psychology without running experiments.
Right.
And so, but when I started, I just was interested in having an encounter. So when I go out on an expedition, I end up feeling kind of like somebody with multiple personalities, because the experiencer in me just wants to have the experience. But the scientist in me wants to be able to scientifically document that and prove that. And I'm sorry, Chris, I've forgotten your question. I went off on a tangent there.
No, you're covering it. I just want to know if you had any suggestions you could give new researchers about how to prepare themselves for a possible Bigfoot encounter.
Sure. So both of my books are divided into two separate books. Mm-hmm. Book one is just kind of background information, scientific knowledge. You need to know confirmation bias, pareidolia, things like that, and defining those things. And then book two is about the science, the experimental design and statistics and all that kind of stuff. But for somebody starting out, in book one, I spent a lot of time on teaching people how to reprogram their fight flight response, because that's not under our voluntary control in general. It was actually discovered by accident, when another scientist was doing some relaxation studies, and they discovered that you could calm the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of your nervous system. And those are the parts of our nervous system that are responsible for fight flight. Right. These days it's being called fight flight, collapse, or fight flight, faint, or freeze, because those are typically the four reactions that people have to the fight flight response.
Right.
But if you teach yourself to relax, by relaxing, you open the door to the parts of your nervous system that control fight flight. The sympathetic division is the excitatory division, or the on switch, and that's when that fight flight response kicks in. The parasympathetic division of the nervous system, that's the off switch to that. That's the calming of the symptoms. You kind of get relaxed and you realize that you're not going to get killed and you don't need to fight or flee. So in both those texts, I teach people a variety of relaxation techniques. Once you can get good at relaxing, then you can do something that used to be called systematic desensitization, which is now called stress inoculation. And in stress inoculation, you brainstorm a list of your most stressful to your least stressful experiences. You rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, and you start with the lower ratings and you get into a relaxed state and you begin to imagine yourself going through that first level of a Bigfoot encounter. Like,
Mhm.
just for example, just walking into a spooky place at night.
Right.
A little bit higher up might be walking into a spooky place and hearing a tree knock, all the way up to the tens where you're actually having a class A encounter and you're seeing Bigfoots. So you start on the lower levels, get relaxed, run that mental movie through, and if you begin to feel anxiety or fear build up, you stop the mental movie, you relax back down to where your relaxation was before you started tensing and stressing up. And then you pick up that mental movie and you run it forward again until you either reach the end or you notice your relaxation deteriorating again. If you notice your relaxation deteriorating again, you stop the mental movie, do the relaxation technique till you're back down relaxed to where you were, and then pick up where you left off. So as you practice that, eventually you can stay calm through that whole encounter.
Mhm.
Then you go up to the next level one and the next level one, and then into level 2, 3, 4, and 5. Not until you master the first level 2 do you go up to the next level 2 and the next level 2 and then on to level 3. So you can reach a point where you can stay calm through some of the most intense encounter experiences you can imagine.
Yeah.
And in doing so, when you have those in real life, you have retrained your fight flight response so that instead of getting stressed out and wanting to flee or fight, you can stay calmer in those situations. Obviously, you don't want to get limp and loose and completely calm because you still got to react and
Yeah.
protect yourself.
Yeah.
And so in the book, then I talk about how you can use something called guided imagery using your imagination or self-hypnosis. And I've got scripts in all my books, and I take you through step by step how to do the self-hypnosis, how to do the
Right.
stress inoculation. And I think anyone who hasn't had a Bigfoot encounter would be good to put themselves through that stress inoculation process, because I can't tell you how many people I have met that have had PTSD
Right.
as a result of their class A and some people class B encounters,
Yeah.
and they don't even have a clue that they've got PTSD. And so then you can use those same techniques to treat that PTSD as you use to reprogram your fight flight response.
Right.
So that would be one thing.
Very
Another
interesting.
another thing would be to spend the money. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Join a group that's going out doing expeditions. And if they charge you, if it's a reasonable amount of money, go for it. If it's not a reasonable amount of money, reconsider it. When I entered BFRO, a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then break camp on Sunday expedition catered by Lori Wade was $200. And that, in my mind, today still is a reasonable price. So if I ever go on another BFRO expedition, I pay $200 to go on that expedition.
Yeah.
I think their prices are going upwards towards $400 now. But the point being, I think get with somebody who knows what's going on. Pay some money for a couple expeditions and learn what you can from those expeditions, because otherwise you're just going to be traipsing around in the woods, probably missing evidence,
Right.
probably not having encounters because you don't know what to look for. Oftentimes you can't tell a Bigfoot from a barred owl. And, through those expeditions, you begin to learn about those things and gain some knowledge. I think if you just go blind into the woods, your chances of recognizing these Bigfoot signs are much lower, and you could be missing a lot of valuable evidence. So that's the second thing. One, desensitize yourself, or stress inoculation do that for yourselves. And then secondly, get some experience with people who know what's going on. A third thing is just keep getting out in the woods. These I differentiate between a genuine skeptic who may not believe but still has an open enough mind to be open to the possibility, versus the trolling and gaslighting skeptics we see on a lot of boards that just are there to provoke and poke and gaslight people.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with taking a true skeptical, and I was skeptical, had a skeptical bias when I did my very first Bigfoot expedition. But getting out there and continuing to get out in the woods once you know what you're looking for. The point being, you're not going to have a Bigfoot experience at the keyboard.
Right.
You got to get out in the woods, and you got to get out regularly, because you're never guaranteed an encounter when you
Right.
go out in the woods. And so that would be the third big thing I would say.
Yeah. At least if you're going out and tracking around the woods, if you don't have an encounter, which you're probably not going to, the worst that can happen is you had a great day out in nature, and that's the most relaxing thing anybody could hope for.
Yeah, and a lot of hunters are skeptics because they've been going out in the woods for 30, 40 years and
Right.
never saw a Bigfoot. But then when you talk to the hunters that have had that experience, they're in a completely different place, in a completely different world. Many of them never return to the spot where they have an encounter because it literally, it scared the poop out of them.
It really changed their outlook on the world.
Yeah.
It goes from being the boogeyman to the boogeyman is real. He's out there.
So, Doc, I want to end this argument right now from somebody in chat who has consistently tried to say that serotonin, well, first he says, when I told him that serotonin and infrasound don't mimic one another because they affect on different neurotransmitters.
Serotonin and what?
Infrasound.
Okay.
He's like, how do you know if someone's state of mind isn't interfering with the brain's production of serotonin, which is known to cause alleged symptoms of infrasound? I've never heard of serotonin ever causing symptoms of infrasound.
Yeah. So our brain, we've simplified down how our brains were. I had a 19-year or 17, I've lost track of how long, year private practice as a neuropsychologist, doing brain injury evaluations and such. And the fact of the matter is there's a lot more than serotonin going on. And we've got dopamine. Serotonin is kind of an excitatory neurotransmitter, whereas dopamine is kind of a calming transmitter. Norepinephrine is, again, an excitatory neurotransmitter. And so all those different neurotransmitters exist in a brain, in a normal brain, in a balance to keep us sane, basically. And when people, for example, get clinically depressed, they may have a serotonergic depression, whereby their body's not producing serotonin, and so then therefore the epinephrine, or the excitatory neurotransmitter, takes over, and they experience nervousness. It's about balance. People who are on antidepressant medicines, they're on them because they've got a neurochemical imbalance in their body that's making them depressed. And those antidepressants are restoring that normal balance. So I'm not sure if I've come full loop back to answering your question.
Well, what the question is posing is that a person on serotonin, the exact question says, is that infrasound? I never. Let me get to the right question.
Well,
hold on, Chris. Hold on. Says, how do you know that someone's state of mind isn't interfering with the brain's production of serotonin, which is now serotonin, which is known to cause the alleged symptoms of infrasound? So what he's saying essentially is that serotonin causes the same symptoms as infrasound.
Many of the same symptoms, because many of those symptoms go along with the fight flight response, but it's just not that simple. It's again, that's why I was focusing on the balance of the neurotransmitters, because the fact of the matter is we've never scientifically measured infrasound.
Mick, I just read back what you said. So I'm sorry, but I just read it verbatim. I read it verbatim.
I think one thing
you said, Mick, and this is the last time I'm going to be addressing this. It says, how do you know that someone's state of mind isn't interfering with the brain's production of serotonin, which is known to cause the alleged symptoms of infrasound? So therefore, you're saying serotonin causes alleged symptoms of infrasound.
Well, the way you can tell the difference is if you're having a chemical imbalance and you're having those you're experiencing those symptoms, that's going to be long term if the chemical imbalance that's causing it is in your brain.
Then
if it's a response to...
So if you were going to ask about the chemical imbalance, Mick, then just say I'm talking about the chemical imbalance.
Yes. If it's a response to infrasound, those effects will be temporary and will wear off. Whereas the other one will be longer.
But the effects of infrasound act on different neurotransmitters than serotonin does.
It's working on, again, the autonomic and the sympathetic nervous system, which involve both serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, all the chemicals in our brain, not just a select one. Go ahead, Steve.
I'm good.
Okay.
Oh no, Steve.
Yep.
Oh man!
Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining.
I can see Mick's point here.
Tired.
Steve.
No.
Yes, Steve.
Steve, when you write
calm down, man, dude. You're mad. Listen, Mick had a point. But you're kind of conflating his point with a different point. If there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, and someone's experiencing those symptoms, which would be similar to infrasound, I think his question is, how do you know that it's not that instead of the Sasquatch? And what I was pointing out is to that effect. If you're experiencing that, like a chemical imbalance because of the serotonin, whatever it is, that would be a long-term effect, and it wouldn't just happen temporarily while you're out in the woods after you've been exposed to infrasound. Because the infrasound exposure, if that's what it was that I got exposed to, was not long lasting. It was short term. Within a matter of a few minutes, I was back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
But
and that's in the study that I referenced in my books, that lab study. um, exposing people to a roar with infrasound,
Yeah.
and exposing people to a roar without infrasound.
Right.
And then you can literally draw blood,
Yes.
and you can measure how much serotonin and all the different neurotransmitters
Right.
are going on, and have they changed since before they were exposed to that or
Right.
not. And
Exactly.
so we really need to get into the lab to study that, because it involves medical procedures,
Yes.
blood draws, cortisol draws, a lot of the neurochemistry and neurochemicals that are involved in
I think that would be
fight
such a
flight.
cool thing after somebody had a Sasquatch encounter, draw blood, see what's going on in their body.
If Bigfoot hasn't, huh?
Yeah. Anybody could, what are the chemicals floating around in their blood after they've had an encounter? Was something not normal went on? Did their brain release endorphins or something of that nature?
And
Interesting.
if their brain, if you expose them to the placebo condition, where they don't they aren't exposed to infrasound,
Right.
and you see those cortisol levels go up, and you see all the different neurotransmitters acting in an excitatory way going
Right.
up, that's a sure sign that we're psyching ourselves up, and it's us creating that fight flight.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're exposed to the combination of the two,
Right.
again, you measure those neurochemicals and stress hormones being produced, and you can tease that out through that experiment,
Yeah.
whether we're
I,
doing it to ourselves or we're doing it to or do the infrasounds causing us to do that. I got a quick question that I just want to throw out there. I've never been exposed to infrasound or had been zapped, but what does anybody else think about whether Bigfoots have to emit an auditory roar to also emit infrasound? Can Bigfoots emit infrasound without making any additional vocalization? I
well,
don't
that's
know
something, right? That's
I don't know
something
the answer to that.
I've asked that question too, because when we had that hillside encounter, when I experienced that, there were no vocalizations present. It was just a something from their direction, a fluttering in that ear that was facing them, and at the same time, my friend's son Tommy had the same thing happening to his ear. So, but as far as any noise, that they weren't making any noise whatsoever, completely quiet.
Sure.
That you wouldn't think.
Interesting.
So I don't know if that was infrasound, but they did something. They were doing something. I don't know what it was.
There's a gentleman, I wish I could remember his name. I'm blocking on his name. He's a pretty big name in Sasquatch research.
Right.
He doesn't believe it's infrasound. He believes it's electromagnetic waves
Yeah.
that cause that zapping kind of phenomena. And
Right.
now that they've got those, I'm sure. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe you're aware of it, that for hunters, they're now making um, EMF blocking suits,
Hmm.
so that your electromagnetic field is blocked, and deer can't identify you or your location from your EMFs, because they are definitely sensitive to it. And there's another experiment for you. Get a group of people and have two of them with one of those EMF blockers,
Right.
blocking suits on, and another two with just normal clothes on,
Right.
and keep doing that until somebody experiences, people begin to experience zapping. And is it the people that are shielded from EMFs,
Right.
or is it the people who aren't shielded from EMFs that are
Well,
having
that
that
is
zapping
interesting.
phenomenon?
They've got to have some sort of way of traveling, because they they move around at night pretty easy, just as easy as we would during the day.
Sure.
So I don't know if they can see, better than we can at night, or they're just more aware of their surroundings, or what. But
Mm-hmm.
got to be something.
What? Yeah. I just forgot my question. I'm sorry. That's going to happen a lot tonight.
Well, Doc, sometimes I'll tell you what, one thing, sometimes I've heard people report when they had an encounter, and, anytime I would ask them, well, describe what you felt when you first saw this creature. Now, sometimes those people have reported different things than what I would have expected. One person said that they had felt peace. They did not feel threatened in any way. And, of course, I think there was an amazement there, but it was kind of like a peaceful encounter for them. And, that kind of strikes me as odd. To me, I didn't feel peace at all. But could somebody have, would it not be a normal reaction? I know normal reaction would be fight or flight, but would not being frightened whatsoever, would that be a normal reaction for some people?
Well, normally, first the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and you have that fight flight response. And once the threat has passed, that's when the parasympathetic division of your nervous system kicks in, and that's the calming part of your nervous system. And so it wouldn't follow the typical pattern that you would expect if you feel a threat. Maybe these people don't feel a threat, and their parasympathetic nervous system just kicks in immediately, and they get this calm, tranquil, peaceful, relaxed kind of feeling.
Right.
I've never heard of that happening, but I guess on a theoretical level, it's possible.
Well, I thought it may be possible, but then again, it made me think, well, wait a minute, that's a lot different than what I experienced. But that doesn't make it not true.
Right.
I'm willing to admit that. But and I think it has to do with a lot of your surroundings,
Mindset.
your environment. If you're inside of an automobile and one crosses the road in front of you while you're safely driving down the road, I don't think that would involve too much. It wouldn't invoke too much fear, because you have that protection of the automobile between you and the creature. But when you're out in nature and there's one 25 feet away from you, there's no protection. You're just open ground between you and the creature. That would be a fearful situation to me.
Sure. I think a group of people that would be interesting to study this issue on are truck drivers, because it's been shown that the motor and the tires on the road, that produces infrasound and is pretty constantly sending infrasound to the trucker themselves.
Right.
And so it would be real interesting to see, just do medical workups on them, and look at these cortisol levels, look at these neurotransmitter levels, and see if they're having any kind of response to that constant bombardment of infrasound, or does their nervous system adapt and get desensitized or numb, if you will, to that infrasound.
Well, I used to drive a truck, and I do know that once you get used to sleeping, going to sleep with the truck idling, of course, you usually, they probably don't do it anymore because fuel's so expensive, but usually you would have the truck idling when you're at rest somewhere, and you'd have the air conditioner going or the heat going, depending on what time of the year it is. And after I stopped driving a truck, I noticed it was difficult getting to sleep at night because I didn't have that sound of the diesel engine, and that seemed to put me to sleep before. So that's
go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's it. So that's interesting that that sound, had gotten so used to it that it actually affected my ability to fall asleep at night without it.
Sure, sure. And why don't the creatures that are known to produce infrasound get sick from it? What about being able, because you don't hear big or elephants getting sick from their own infrasound or from
Right.
infrasound that they're receiving from another pack of elephants.
Right.
Why is it that they don't get sick from the same infrasound that they're producing?
Right. We got a question from David Parker. It says, do you think infrasound is a passive means to drive humans out of their territory? David Parker.
Yeah, David. Hey, buddy, how are you? Nice to see you. I um I don't think we know, to be honest with you. Again, that's an empirical question in and of itself, and I have more questions than I've got answers, because this stuff really just hasn't been studied. It seems logical that that's what it would be, because sure enough, that's what happens.
Yeah.
People get the hell out of there if they can move. I've Some of my friends have gotten into the freeze mode where they just can't. They freeze. They can't move.
Right.
And but again, I think that's a question that needs to be studied.
Yeah. And let's see, Mick's got a question. It says, question for the doc. Do you think Sasquatch can definitely emit infrasound, or are you working on the hypothesis?
Well, we're still trying to prove scientifically that Bigfoot is a known, an
Right.
identified and known species.
We don't know.
Right. So anything beyond that, is a working hypothesis,
Right.
rather than a law or a fact. Until we start doing the science, we don't know. Everybody looks at the DNA studies as the end all to proving Bigfoot is a known species. The thing about it is, number one, because there's no Bigfoot norms in the database, the best you can hope for is unknown species.
Yes.
And if you study other cryptids, there are some other cryptids out there, and you don't really know if that's, is that a Bigfoot or is that a dog man, for example.
Right.
And so again, it comes back to the scientific, to needing to do these kinds of experiments to kind of figure that out. Otherwise, we're just offering our own opinions. And again, as I spoke to earlier, our own opinions are biased. We can't help but be biased. And this is a really important point for all those people who think they're objective observers. Sensation, if you stick your hand in a fire, that sensation, that pain sensation, runs from the nerves in your fingertips up into your spinal cord and then hits your brain. It's sensation until the millisecond it hits your brain. Then it becomes perception. And our perception is formed by our life experiences. And so, because even twins living in the same household, going to the same school, they still don't have an identical life experience.
Right.
Psychology has done a lot of twin studies to try and figure this stuff out. And so, again, without doing the science, we're relying on our perception, be it visual or auditory or smell or taste or feelings inside of our body. And all those things are contaminated by our life experiences. And that contaminates what those sounds or those sensory experiences mean for us. Take a piece of Kentucky bluegrass and show it around to people, and ask them, what color is this? How many people are going to say blue and how many people are going to say green? You know, we all have different visual perceptions of things, and those perceptions are biased by our experience, which is why people that are just swinging their member around debating whether this is a picture of Bigfoot or not, or whether this is a Bigfoot call or not, they can't help but be biased by their life experience, no matter how hard they try. And that's why we need the experimental model and the statistical analysis to take that confirmation bias out of the formula, because we can't take it out of ourselves.
Right. And regarding the DNA collection, if that does bring up a sample, that's going to be great. But then again, since there's not a type specimen on file,
yeah,
the best we're going to have is just it's an unknown primate.
And I really didn't make my main point, but you just cued it for me. Once we get a DNA sample of an unknown species, let's say we can even get a DNA sample of Bigfoot. That doesn't mean we've scientifically proven that Bigfoot produces infrasound. That doesn't mean that we know Bigfoots are producing the wood knocks.
Right.
We know that experientially, but until we can prove that scientifically, it's still not safe to automatically attribute those phenomena to Bigfoot. We still have to do the experimental scientific research to link those phenomena to the Bigfoot. So the research is going to be far from over if we ever can prove it's Bigfoot through DNA. There's still a lot of research to be done.
I think, once we've proven they exist and we can find a group of these creatures living together like a family unit, then we can start sending in people like to do like the Jane Goodalls can live with the group and make observations of their behaviors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Are
you guys familiar with Janice Carter's work?
I'm familiar with Janice, yes.
50 years of Tennessee Chronicles, 50 years of living with Bigfoot. That's just fascinating to me. And when she first started coming out with that, and when Mary Green and her wrote that book,
right,
that was a highly respected text, if you will. All kinds of investigators came to her farm to check all that stuff out. And so, but again, they weren't doing experimental science. They were just looking for sign. And there's a big difference between the two.
Hoping to have a sighting themselves, I think.
Sure.
Igor Brzezinski. Burtsev. Okay. Igor Burtsev. Yeah, he actually lived with her for a while.
Yeah. I know you guys aren't very big on woo, but there's a Native American fellow, Barry, I'm forgetting his name, but he took a group of 14 people out on an expedition, and he tells the story of how the whole group saw a portal open up and a cloaked Bigfoot come through it. And they interacted with each other, and the Bigfoot went back into the portal and it closed. Everybody saw that except Igor Burtsev, because he fainted when that portal appeared and the cloaked Bigfoot came out, or so the story goes. So,
well, admittedly, I'm skeptical of the portal deal, and the only reason it comes from a bias on my own, because I've not seen that. But am I open-minded? Yes.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly physics, at least theoretically, the quantum physics keeps that a possibility. String theory keeps that a possibility. The theory is we don't move forward and backward in time, but in string theory, it's like a a ball of yarn with these different timelines going on at the same time. And rather than going back in time or forward in time, time travel can be accomplished by switching to another thread, another dimension that is behind where you are in the main dimension you live with, and then you're going back in time. Or you can go forward in time by jumping on to another thread that
Right.
is at a faster rate. So theoretically it's possible. It's going to be a tough thing to capture scientifically, though.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm a big believer in the biological, that I
Hmm.
believe these are biological creatures. And the only reason is because I've not seen anything that pulled me away from that.
Hmm.
But if
Well,
I see a portal open up and one step out, hey, I'm willing I'm willing to go
you're
there.
open to it.
Yes,
You're open
sir.
to it. Well, sadly, kudos to Jeff Meldrum. He's doing experimental science in his research. I don't know of any other, and of course, the people in his book that he cites in his book, like Henner Fehrenbach. But I don't know of anybody out there right now besides Dr. Meldrum who is doing experimental science with Bigfoot. If you guys know of somebody, I would love to meet him.
Well, Dr. Meldrum has done a lot. He's done a lot for the subject,
Hmm.
and his study on the feet and the foot construction is just wow.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. We
Yep.
did have another question. Let's see. From Troy in Tennessee. It says, Doc, how do we as normal people begin to do scientific expeditions? I think maybe you covered that a little bit, but
A little bit. And so read my chapter on experimental design. I lay out the basic types of experimental designs that psychology uses. And I think in particular, the reason that psychology is and psychological research is primed to break things open for us is because think about what psychological science has already done. You can't directly observe, you can't directly tap into intelligence. You can't stick a sensor in the person's brain and figure out how intelligent they are. Emotions, we see the behavioral results of intelligence and emotions, but we can't directly observe that in the brain. We observe that through the behaviors that the brain creates. And so we've been in psychology, we've been able to establish things like intelligence and emotions and thoughts, even though those aren't things we can directly observe. We indirectly observe them through their manifestations of those factors, but you can't again stick a sensor or take a picture of the person's brain and see their emotions. It's got to be studied neurochemically, and and so we've been able to define intelligence, define different emotions, and we've been able to create ways to test for that. And so if we can capture enigmatic kind of phenomena like that you
right.
can't directly measure, but you can measure through behavioral manifestations. Bigfoot is very elusive and very enigmatic, and I think it's a perfect fit. And now again, I'm sorry I keep doing this to you guys, but going off on that tangent has made me lose your main question again.
No, no, you're fine. You're fine.
What what
You're just talking about how we could, as a regular
Okay. Yeah.
Joe, everybody investigator, what can we do to make more
Yeah.
scientific with
So
that?
read my chapter on experimental design. Read my chapter on statistical analysis.
Hmm.
And if you decide you want to get deeper into that, pick up an even easier text to understand besides mine. There's only so many ways you can simplify experimental design or statistical analysis, but experimental design for dummies or statistical analysis for dummies. Pick up those books, and they're going to be able to walk you through it in a more simplified fashion than I was able to in my book. And they, you can learn. You don't have to have a PhD to learn how to do an experimental design. You don't have to have a PhD to do statistical analysis. Some of the basic tests, like calculating an average or a standard deviation being how many steps higher and lower than average it is, are the behaviors occurring. Um, if you if you want to do experimental science, you've got to either tackle experimental design and statistical analysis and the full scientific method yourself, or you've got to hire somebody that knows experimental design and can do your statistical analysis for you, and then help you interpret that numeric data. And I think that's the big hurdle we face in the Bigfoot community. We've gotten so used to recordings and pictures and footprints, being the tell-all of Bigfoot's presence. And that's not enough. That's not enough because it involves our perception. And the only way we can take ourselves out of that loop is with experimental design and statistical analysis. Otherwise, all the things we've been doing in observational science are great because they are the foundation upon and lay the groundwork upon what we need to do experimentally. Without that observational science, we would. I just saw Troy from Tennessee's question about Doc, are you for hire?
Yeah, I saw that.
um, um, you know, people. So part of my difficulty is I'm now physically disabled because of my medical condition. And so to run any of these experiments I outline in the field, I can't physically go to the remote areas where there's very few, if any, humans out there and count how many tree knocks we'd get back in response. And so, the difficulty is forming an experimental team that is able to follow up and recheck your results and monitor your results. And I think that's you can't do it by yourself. It's not a one-man show. You need anywhere from to make it not taxing on any one human being, you probably need a couple teams of 4 to do this kind of research. And I can't do that right now anymore because of my physical limitations. But I would be happy to consult with any team that is interested in getting into this. And frankly, they'd be doing me a favor because I've really only had one taker. Craig Roach was my primary research partner, and he is the only person regularly setting up experiments out in the field and collecting that kind of data. Charlie Raymond does a little bit of that, but I haven't been able to get too many people on board. I averaged 250 downloads or views from my 36 episode YouTube show and podcast, but the distance between people and coordinating all that is a bit of a challenge with everybody scattered all across the United States. You're going to have to figure out a way to get people in one area at the same time and start running the experiments.
Well, could you share with us what your YouTube channel name is so we can look it up and maybe the podcast list?
Sure. It was called Grasping Sasquatch. That part of my new book is the same, Grasping Sasquatch. It was called Stories in Science. Grasping Sasquatch Stories in Science. And I know for a fact that's still available on Doug Hycheck's Untold Radio site. I don't know if you can still find them on Facebook these days or not. I never watch my own work, so I haven't gone back and looked. But
we'll have to check that out.
I know they're
everybody
available.
In the chat and everybody on the podcast listening, check out the YouTube channel, Grasping Sasquatch Stories in Science.
And that's based on my 2 books. In that series, I teach the relaxation exercises. I teach the stress inoculation. I teach self-hypnosis, because in my book, I've got scripts for all those things written out in the appendix that you could just record onto a CD or a cassette tape, if anyone still uses those, and do it that way. You know, listen to your hypnotic induction, listen to your stress inoculation induction, let your own voice, or if you want somebody else's voice to do it, let them do the induction for you and record it. And then when you want to do it and you don't want to have to think about it, all you got to do is pop in the CD or pop in the cassette tape, and you're good to go. Do I have a website online? I wouldn't call it a website. I'm not going to get into pimping Bigfoot, but I have my personal webpage, and as it turns out, that's where all my Bigfoot stuff is.
Well, if you got a site you can share with us, I mean, that's why we're all here, Doc. We're here to learn more about you.
Yeah, it's it's John S. Baranchok. That's my email address. Anybody that's familiar with me, help me out. What's my Facebook? I think it's just John Baranchok is the name of my Facebook page. And that's John S. Baranchok. Yeah, that's where all my Bigfoot stuff is. If you really want to get a sense for what's in the book, before I started sharing that information on my website, I had a page called Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research, and I actually included excerpts from my book posted on that web page, so people can look at that web page, scroll back a while, and you'll be able to do some readings of excerpts from my book.
And Jen has got a link. If anybody's watching the chat replay, Jen's got a link in here to the Untold Radio episodes.
Okay,
check those out. It's in the chat. We should post along with the show on the replay after a day or two.
Sure.
There was a question earlier, and I think okay. David Parker says, "How could Bigfoot make a portal without technology?" Well, that's a good question, David. Yeah. That's one of the things
I have a lousy answer for it. I don't know. You know, I could stand here and speculate as I just did using string theory and jumping from one string to another, but I can't say that with any scientific certainty. So I really don't know the answer to that.
Weird. I think that's a great answer, and it's an honest one. Though. We don't know.
Yeah, if you know, one of the things about doing scientific research is you've got to be open to all possibilities. because once you start narrowing down those possibilities, that's reflecting your bias. And we need to get out of our own heads with that bias. And again, allow the experiment and the statistical analysis to give us our answers rather than our biased opinions.
So let me ask this question. If over years you've had experiences and investigative, research, and it's starting to lead you in one direction, and all of a sudden this topic comes out of another direction, uh, I mean, do you completely discount it? Or, like, I have always tried to explain that side of it with psychological effects, infrasound, other anomalies, rather than it being necessarily Bigfoot related. Because when I first got involved in this big cabal, the number of woo sightings were extremely rare. There was only one or two people talking about it, but nobody actually experiencing it. It wasn't until at least I saw the advent of social media that it started to expound exponentially, almost to the effect like people are trying to say, here, look at me. Almost
Mhm.
like they were trying to establish some gravitas.
Yeah, it's a contagion,
Right.
kind of like almost.
Kind of
Yeah.
like the rake. There's people out there thinking the rake is real when that was created by that creepy pasta website. And it's just, I think this whole woo standard has been, I mean, you always had Mary Green and Janice Carter, which they weren't really necessarily a 100% woo.
Hmm.
It didn't jump in and out of a portal. It didn't, come down off a UFO. And, David Parker asked, wouldn't they use technology? And I stand on the belief that if these were something using technology, why would you be dropped off in such a violent environment naked? To
Yeah.
me, I try to establish the common sense. So that's, I mean, is that necessarily bias? I suppose it would be, but
Yes.
um,
But, and again, at the risk of repeating myself, that's why we've got to study all aspects of,
that was good. The
we
rake
got
is
to
real.
study. Well, I'm not saying it's real.
No.
Um,
Finding the trackway said the rake is real. I use it with my leaf shredder.
yeah. We've got to do the science. We've
Right.
got to do the science. I think a large percentage of the Bigfoot community is flesh and blood. But we have, other than Dr. Meldrum, we haven't done any science on that. And so we've all taken this leap in faith, to believe that it's flesh and blood or a relic hominid or and the same with the woo phenomenon. We're taking that leap in faith based on our personal opinions without having any scientific data to back it up. So you got to look at both sides of the coin scientifically.
Yeah, but it's funny because like footprints are not accepted by science, but they are scientific evidence. They are
Yeah.
evidence. So that's why to me is like, hey, this is a flesh and blood thing. It leaves tracks. It leaves hairs. It leaves blood. I've always explained that we always have that last option, is that perhaps what they saw was not necessarily a Bigfoot, but a manifestation of a paranormal event, which is
Hmm.
completely another realm of study.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I, to me, it's always been that, we traverse the three big realms, and we travel the Bigfoot realm, the UFO or UAP realm, or the paranormal realm. And
Hmm.
people have reported these to connect with all the other two pieces of the pie there. And I always say, well, perhaps maybe they're not connected. Maybe it's just coincidental.
Yeah. Yes. And differentiating between coincidence, correlation, and causality. We're trying to In the observational model, we've taken that leap in faith that Bigfoot made that footprint. Well, I don't know how many people have seen Bigfoot actually make that footprint. You know, we've got to take ourselves and our brain out of the loop if we have any hopes of being more objective. If the primary results are filtered through our perception, the chance of confirmation bias and other forms of bias kicking in is more likely than not to happen. And that's why we need experimental design and statistical analysis.
And I've always said this too. If somebody comes up with a sighting to me where, you know, like a local one, especially, and they say, well, this is what happened and it was paranormal or there was a woo event, it's still worth investigating. If I had confirmation bias, I would immediately put that one in the trash can, but I'm going to go out there and investigate it and see if there's any physical signs and anything like that.
Sure.
And perhaps we can.
Well, I don't know that you necessarily have to put it in the trash box. I mean, you can
Right.
be biased and still come up with the right answer.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Being biased doesn't mean that you're going to come up with the wrong answer. But again, until we start using statistical analysis and experimental design, we haven't taken our own biases out of that, because
Right.
the fact of the matter is we don't know when we're being biased. You know, we can do things to guard against it, but until we let the numbers tell us the answer rather than our own opinions, we're in this hopeless cycle. We've been stuck. When was the Patterson Gimlin film? 65, 68 years ago?
67.
67. So how many years is that to now?
Too many.
Yeah.
57.
We've been using that same model for all these years, and it's almost become ingrained in us. You know, one of the positive things that I think about BFRO is they take all comers. It doesn't matter what your education level is. It doesn't matter what your experience is. You know, all walks of life can become BFRO members. And as such, though, again, because of perception, we bring that bias, we bring that perceptual background to our experiences when we do experiential observational research. And we've just got to get ourselves out of our own way, I think, to get some solid scientific answers.
Makes sense. So, why do you think people hoax? We'll get into that last little topic.
Attention, monetary reward. Said I wasn't going to get into Bigfoot, or pimping Bigfoot, but you know, the thing that the observational science is really good for is creating celebrity, creating financial gain. And I think sadly, you know, I had to take 2 years off as I recovered from my illness. I'm told I can't say what that illness was on the word. It's a word that Facebook doesn't like. But so I've been off for 2 years, and I'm now physically able to at least get out and sit around a campfire and, you know, hike a quarter mile down the path before I got to sit down and take a break. But I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
That's okay. If you ever hear me talk, I don't have a train of thought. I have a train wreck of thought.
So, you know, we gotta. Oh, okay. So pimping Bigfoot. So there's a lot of rewards and there's a lot of motivation, be it unconscious or conscious, to stick with the observational model. It's made a lot of people rich. It's made a lot of, I don't know about a lot, but it's made a select group of people rich and famous. And I think a lot of people at this point are trying to exploit that observational model for fame and fortune. And I think we've kind of lost sight of why. Well, I know at this point, my main reason, it gets back to that multiple personality. I want to have the experience, but I also want to be able to prove something scientifically. And at this point, again, when you develop a new field of science, you start with observation. But once you've got the observational science down, then and you want to become a legitimate field of science, you got to move on to the experimental science. And if you don't, you just get stuck. We should have been doing experimental science 20 or 30 years ago, and we would either be really close to having these issues solved, or we'd certainly be on the right path. But we've become entrenched in the empirical observational science, and that's been parlayed into fortune and fame, and people are chasing that fortune and fame, and there's a lot of reason not to move on to experimental science.
See, I'm under the impression that the vast majority of it is just attention seeking, not necessarily for money, because, like I said, the people that actually attain the big fame and fortune, they're very few in number in this field.
Yeah.
But it seems like they want to be moved. Like, one of the most prevalent cases I talk about is the case of the Bigfoot peeper. And that was the picture of the Bigfoot peeping in the window. And this guy was laying this all over Facebook, saying how he had gotten these pictures. And from a criminal psychology modality, his order of events didn't sound quite plausible. He's grabbing a video camera. His wife screams. Then he decides after 8 minutes of filming that he's going to grab his firearm, because if you felt that immediate threat, you would have grabbed the firearm first.
Right.
And as it turns out, when I started doing research on this case, turns out this guy is on the offenders list. And I don't want to say that keyword on YouTube for doing something to somebody that was very young. So he is, for all intents and purposes, I realized why he was doing this, not because of anything like he was trying to get kids or anything like that, but I think that he has been ostracized by so many different communities because of his history. He uses his middle name, not his first name, to put this information out there, and he's trying to gain some connection with people somehow over this. And I think that's a fair assessment of what it was.
And even if it's not fraud, think about what happens when you post a cast that you just made, or you've got a picture or a video and you post that up. Even if you're not interested in fortune or fame, you get the warm fuzzies. You get the pats on the pats on the back and the congratulations, and you got to get a lot of attention for it. And I think that is part of why people hoax. They're looking for attention. They're looking for those pats on the back, and it's an easy way to get them. Especially, fortunately, I don't even remember the web pages from when I was when I was advertising for my show on some of these sites. But there are some sites that are just about solely dedicated to possible pareidolia pictures, and you get the blue circles or the red arrows pointing. And one thing I did after my I stopped my show is I went out into my backyard and just took some photos, one camera frame, and then moved to the left, to the next camera frame, to the left, and I put some pictures out there, and I knew I'd find pareidolia out there because it's all around us. Again, we can't control our brain enough to necessarily distinguish between pareidolia and reality unless you physically then go out in and look closer at what you just took a picture of. And, you know, there are sites thriving on what are more likely than not pareidolia pictures. And I just really don't think that helps the community or the species all that much. I think it makes us look idiotic. I think it feeds into the gaslighters and the trolls and the disingenuous skeptics. And I think we've got to move away from that and again come back to experimental science.
That pareidolia is a bad thing. I mean, years ago, Steve and I were both admins over at the old Bigfoot forums, and I don't even know if that site is still up now. They might have changed it when they made it the new Bigfoot forums, but a lot of guys would, well, not a lot. There was this one guy in particular, and I think he was from Florida, but don't quote me on that. I'm not certain, but it was somewhere down south. He took a photo of what looked like a drainage ditch and the grass on the other side of the drainage ditch. Now, mind you, it was maybe 4 or 5 inch tall grass that looked like it just, you know, about ready time to mow. And he had I don't know, 7, 10, 11 red circles. He said, look at the Bigfoots. Well, you know, according to him, the Bigfoot would have been about, you know, 3 or 4 inches tall if that was the case. It's just nonsense. I don't know if he was doing it seriously or he had some sort of issue.
Yeah. Well, when I posted that picture of the pareidolic Bigfoot and the arch that were in my backyard,
right.
When I posted those, I said right up front that these are pareidolia pictures. And, you know, we don't always read completely or pay good attention when we surf through the different pages and the different posts. And even though I said it was pareidolia, people started arguing about whether it was real or pareidolia. And during that time in my posting, I would occasionally make a joke. Well, we just need to make a pareidolia only website. We don't want any real pictures of Bigfoot. We just want pareidolia pictures of Bigfoot. And honest to God, I wish I could remember her name. I can't, and I'm sorry if you're out there, but she sent a picture to me that was pareidolia, but we had a text back and forth. She had to convince me that it was pareidolia because it looked so much like a Bigfoot. Well, I finally asked, well, how do you know it was pareidolia? She said, well, we walked right up to it and saw that it was a stump, big stump sticking out of the ground. And you know, if you're taking pictures of Bigfoot that could be pareidolia, the very next step in your investigation is to move closer to those images or what you're seeing and visually and thoroughly investigate whether that thing's still there when you're right on top of it and discover that it's not a Bigfoot.
Exactly. Follow up.
So
you guys in chat are killing me with these questions. Did you star that one, Steve?
Yeah.
I might have. I see somebody's asking about how I like my omelets.
So here's a great example of pareidolia. Right there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, even the witness said, I don't know what it is. And we sent somebody out there and confirmed that that whole backside of the mountain was black rock. And for whatever reason, right in there was just a bare area of the wood line that looked a heck of a lot like a Sasquatch standing there.
If you want to see a pareidolia Bigfoot, here's your prescription. Go to an open meadow and take one shot and then just continue in 360 degrees and take pictures all around you of that tree line. And I guarantee you're going to see what you think is a Bigfoot. whether there was a Bigfoot there or not. Not that I'm promoting finding pareidolia pictures, but it's easy enough to do on your own,
Right.
and if you can create that effect like I did, knowing that there wasn't a Bigfoot in my backyard, what the heck are you going to do if you believe that there's a Bigfoot there? And people are going to fall in line with that.
Well, finding the trackways got a quiz right on this subject. Is pareidolia a process of the mind, or is it the end result?
The end result of the mind?
Maybe that means the end result of wanting to see Bigfoot in your pictures, maybe.
Yeah, again, it comes back to, there are not only visual pareidolia, but there's also auditory pareidolia. I'm not sure where in our conversation this came up, but there was some mention of being surrounded by multiple Bigfoots. And there's an auditory pareidolia called the glissando effect, where there only needs to be one or two Bigfoots in the area, and they can create the auditory impression that you're surrounded by tons and tons of Bigfoot, because you hear that sound coming from all around you, a 360 degree kind of circle. And so you got to investigate further. You got to investigate.
And there is so much audible pareidolia in the paranormal. And,
yes.
Like there are times where things are not very clear, and you're like straining to listen, and it's like got a lot of noise in it, and you hear, and then somebody will put what they think it's saying down there, and then automatically you hear it.
Yeah.
So
my first expedition, I had a flat tire trying to get there, and I spent I don't know how many hours on the roadside until Jeff Carpenter, not to be confused with Scott Carpenter, Jeff Carpenter kind of came to my rescue. And so I end up having to set up my tent away from the rest of the crowd. And so I just met these people. I didn't know about the vibe. So I'm laying there in my tent, and I could have swore I heard people whispering about me and talking about me while I was laying there in my tent. And so I finally got out of my tent, and I didn't take 2-3 steps away from my tent that I realized it was the sound of the water trickling through is it called a culvert pipe?
Yep.
Falling out of a culvert pipe down into the little puddle or pool that it makes from the water. That's what I was hearing as people whispering about me. And so again, it just comes back to, you got to move further and further investigate. And that's why reprogramming your fight flight response, I think, is so important, because if you're certain that it's a Bigfoot, you're not gonna be able to move forward and investigate that more thoroughly. And without learning to reprogram your fight flight, you're going to be more likely to just exit that site than you are going to be to move forward and investigate it further.
Chris, look what time it is.
Already. Well, wait a minute. Now I wanted to get in a little bit more. At least one more question, and it's for both of you guys. Dr. John, a lot of people that had their first encounter, first sighting, are experience sort of a trauma, and that's been described as maybe possibly being post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
What would you recommend those people do to seek relief from that experience?
Sure. Again, I don't think I answered the last question. To the last question, yes, it's our brain the perceptual part of our brain processing that visual and auditory information that creates the pareidolia effect. If symptoms of PTSD, first you've got to have an experience where either your life was threatened or you witnessed somebody else's life be threatened or die, you've got to have a horror response from that. And then there's a list of other symptoms that go along with that. And so if you're having these symptoms, you need to seek professional help. It doesn't mean you're crazy. Trauma is very real. The last 2 years of my career, I worked with the Veterans Administration, and hearing these stories of these guys, like going to a helicopter or a plane crash, and these guys are scouring the mountains and finding limbs all over the place and having to put body pieces together to identify a person. And it's, there aren't too many people out there that aren't going to be traumatized to that. And so I do believe, I not believe, I know there is such a thing as Bigfoot PTSD. And the best way to treat that is seeing a therapist who specializes in anxiety disorders, because post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety disorder. And one of the treatments of choice right now with that is the stress inoculation process that I outline in my book. Nonetheless, if you're certain you're having PTSD, you've already have that going on, I would not recommend just reading John's book and doing it by yourself, because there are subtleties and things that you've got to be aware of and know. So that's why I'm advocating, seeing a therapist who's well versed in treating anxiety disorders, because they're going to know those techniques and they're going to know best how to help you.
Thank you.
And there's no shame in experiencing PTSD. Again, PTSD frequently comes along with the fight-flight response. And unless you do relaxation and learn to reprogram your fight-flight response, normally your fight-flight response is on automatic pilot. You're not going to be able to control when that kicks in. I've met people who have had 5, 6 Class A sightings and all of a sudden have their first fight-flight response, even though they've had other Class A sightings where they didn't have that. And so without reprogramming your fight-flight response, you don't have any modicum of control over it, and you're more vulnerable to developing PTSD as a result.
And Steve, have you spoken with witnesses that you feel like experienced PTSD from
Absolutely.
their Bigfoot encounter?
Absolutely. And generally, I try to get them to come out of their shell a bit by talking about it, because a lot of the stigma I find is the PTSD I find is the stigma associated with it. A lot of them feel like they can't talk to anybody about it. A lot of them feel alone. A lot of them feel like they'll be mocked if they talk about it. So getting them to talk to it in front of a crowd that's going to be receptive of that. I mean, a lot of times we did that with Joe Snyder. Joe had a lot of PTSD built up in that sighting, even though he talked about it on podcasts. He never talked about it in person to anybody really, except. And once I got him to do that, there was another guy by the name of Dave Groves. Again, I got him to talk to a very pro Bigfoot audience. And at the end of it, he felt like there was some relief of that tension or anxiety going on surrounding that.
Yeah. I kind of glossed over some of the other symptoms of PTSD on that checklist after you've been exposed to this horrible experience. But avoiding things that are related to or represent the event, sights, sounds, re-experiencing the event when you don't want to, intrusive thinking about the event. It's kind of like it gets a grip and takes control. And the big danger in developing PTSD and it going untreated is it's not going to just stay localized to Bigfoot. Once that anxiety gets its claws in you, first it's going to start with Bigfoot, but then it's going to be going into the forest or hearing any animal sounds. And eventually you can end up holed up in your house and never leaving your bedroom because the anxiety slowly spreads to other areas of your life, even though maybe it started with a Bigfoot encounter. And so there's no shame in seeking professional help from that. But the longer you let it go and don't do something about it, the more likely it's going to begin to spread to other areas of your life. And you're going to begin to experience other anxiety disorders like agoraphobia and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, if you're injured, you go to a doctor and seek treatment.
Yes.
And if you have an injury that was traumatic here, you go seek treatment.
Yeah.
No shame in it.
Absolutely.
Oh, I recognize that.
It is the 11. The bell tolls 11.
Yeah.
So, Chris, let's wind her up.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Dr. Baranchok for being with us, and what a great show. Thank you so much.
Well,
it's
thank
been
you
an honor
guys.
having you on here. And,
thank you guys for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Gives
the
me
honor is all on this end. We appreciate it.
My word.
And thank everybody in chat, guys. We appreciate you guys for joining us. Every time, we wouldn't have a show without you. And we appreciate each and every one of you guys. You're the best audience we could ever hope for. And we know that. We do.
Amen.
And just, if it's your first time watching, make sure you hit like, subscribe, do all the things, smash the buttons, do all that stuff. And don't forget to join us on Wednesday nights.
That's right. We're going to be here this Wednesday night because next Friday or this coming Friday, I'll be in Pennsylvania. We may still be able to pull a show off on Sunday night because I'll be en route home Sunday morning. So
you're going to be tired.
But, the drive to Ohio is like 11 and a half hours. The drive to PA is 8. So not as bad.
Oh, yeah. Only 8 hours.
That's a piece of cake. Do that in my sleep standing up. And Mick, I love you too, man. I want to apologize because there was a couple of trigger words and it's been a really tough week. And not to mention the fact that a lot of people don't know this, but with the whole spinal cord thing going on, I'm constantly, like today, I'm dealing with a little bit of numbness in the arm. Not so much pain, but numbness, and it's a little agitating. So my agitation factor is that, and there was a trigger word that you had said in there, be careful, that triggered me. I'm aware of my own triggers sometimes. So I got up, I walked away, came back.
Pain can cause that. And
absolutely.
Discomfort can cause that.
I've been in a lot of discomfort lately, but
yes,
soon to be, because September 9th, just a week from this Monday, the nerves get burned and I should be back, hopefully. Very cool. Jen has a new office assistant. So mine is absent. He's got a little itchy problem since he's been to the vet. So I don't know if it's a reaction to his vaccinations or whatever, but so the office assistant was kind of being fussy, so I let him out.
Yeah. If I could just say one thing before you guys sign off. Troy in Tennessee, he's going to this Squatch out where Lori Wade's going to be presenting. And absolutely, I'm there just to shoot the shit and meet reestablish old friendships and meet new friends. So I'm willing to talk with anybody just about any topic, even if it's not Bigfoot. I'll hold forth.
Good deal. What a guy.
I wish I could come. Troy said, Steve, come to the Squatch out in South Pittsburgh next Friday. I wish I could, but that's actually day one of the Pennsylvania gig. So we'll be doing a bunch of stuff there, including getting out in the field. So that should be a good time. And, hey, so we will do the evidence review on Wednesday. I apologize. Friday, I had some family stuff to do. I had some family stuff to do yesterday. So and all in a positive way. So it's been a really busy weekend for me. Again, everybody have a great Labor Day tomorrow. Enjoy your day off if you're off tomorrow. And thank you again, Dr. John, for coming on.
Thank you.
You know, we will talk more in the future. Absolutely.
Good.
And
I'd love to come back.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I love, you know, sometimes if we get something that we need a psychologist on, especially, I'd like to get your rundown on it, you know.
Sure.
And that would be a lot of fun. And, you know, that's what we're about here on the channel, is about putting, you know, some real education and science out there. That's something that you're not getting on most channels. You'll get some, but that's our major focus now. And our focus is actually on our podcast, not so much doing stories or anything like that, but we will drop those occasionally as well. But for me, I don't know what kind of video we're going to be kicking out, if we can even do a live feed from Pennsylvania, but by golly, if I can do it, I will. So, but again, thank you, Dr. John. We love you guys. We'll catch you all here Wednesday night, 9 p.m., just a mere 12 hours before I kick off for Pennsylvania. So everybody be good. We'll see you in a couple of days. Have a great Labor Day. We love you all. And, you know, most of all, keep on squatching, folks. We'll catch you Wednesday night.
We thank you for being here with us on Squatch-D TV. If you haven't taken the time yet, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And oh yes, hit that notification bell too. We don't want you to miss anything. If you really like our content, you should consider becoming a member, and it's really inexpensive and a great way to support not only the show, but honest Bigfoot research. Everyone have a great week. Be safe and God bless. We will see you all here next time on Squatch-D TV. Keep on squatching.